Hi, my name is Matt Ackerson, and this interview is sponsored by SaberBlast.com. What does it take to build a $13 million business from scratch? Today I'm joined by Chris Hurn, who did exactly that. Chris, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
No problem. So Chris, $13 million last year, that's enormous. What kind of profit are you guys doing on that?
A very substantial profit. No, don't you worry, Matt. We're privately held for a reason.
Gotcha. I had to ask. I'm sure the audience would be curious, but...
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So, Mercantile Capital isn't your only company. You have recently written a book called The Entrepreneur's Secret to Creating Wealth, and you also have, fairly recently, I believe, started the franchise Kennedy's All-American Barber Club, and we'll talk about both of those. But Mercantile Capital Corp, how did it get started, and how long have you been running it?
Well, I've been running it now for 10 years, and we just financed commercial real estate for small business owners and entrepreneurs all around the United States. We've now done, we've had closings in about 40 states across the Union, as well as Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. We've now financed about $1.4 billion in those 10 years. Last year was our biggest year we ever had, which we did a little more than $400 million in total project financing. And what's interesting is we don't do any $10, 20, $50, $100 million deals. We typically do anywhere from $500,000 deals on up to maybe $5 million transaction size. We do have a few that are a little bit bigger than that, but it gives you an idea of how many small business owners that we work with in a given year. So it's been pretty substantial. And how I got into it was I started in small business lending about 15 years ago. Actually, out of grad school, I worked for a high-tech startup before that was real fashionable, and was in sales and marketing there, and became a top salesperson until some headhunters came recruiting me, and they brought me into GE Capital. And this was back in the Jack Welch days, and it was pretty exciting. I learned a lot about management and leadership at GE back in the day, and I was in the division that was financing small businesses, small to mid-sized companies in Florida. They actually moved me down to Florida. I live in Orlando, Florida, and I learned a lot, but as you can imagine, with big companies, the further you get away from the visionary, in this case Jack Welch, the more the message sort of dissipates a little bit. And eventually I wanted to go into business myself, and long story short, I started Mercantile about 5 years later, actually. So and it's been a pretty good run. We've been on the 5,000 list of fastest growing companies in America 3 years in a row, and got a whole host of other awards and things we've been honored with, and most of that is because of our focus and because we have, I think, some of the best customers in the world.
And what does your ideal customer look like?
Ideal client for us is somebody who's profitable. Which is not always the case. So you can't be a non-for-profit, non-publicly traded entity, and then it's pretty broad. And actually, the definition probably covers about 98% of all of the non-for-profit, privately held businesses in America. In that we're looking for people that across all sorts of different industries, who their cash flow available from their business can service the new proposed debt of buying commercial real estate. And for most of these folks, it's really easy to transition from leasing their space into owning their space. In fact, in most cases, they're actually saving money on doing that. And most of these businesses are not going to go public one day. I mean, their real exit strategy is to sell their business or shut down their business one day after, maybe if you're a veterinarian and you've run the vet practice for 30 years, eventually you're going to try and sell it to your partners. If you have some of the business, maybe you have a son or daughter who became a vet and you want to give the business to them, or more than likely, you're just going to shut it down. So those are the options, and what I teach people in my new book, The Entrepreneur's Secret to Creating Wealth, is how to really extract and sort of tag on this wealth creation strategy onto your small businesses. I think it's one of the biggest advantages of being a small business owner, that you can do this. You can't really do this if you are running a publicly held company. company because Wall Street will just trash you. I mean, in Wall Street parlance, this becomes a drag on your return on assets if you own your real estate. And so small business owners don't have to be worried about some of that stuff. So it's a huge advantage for them, and makes great sense right now in that we're living in historically low interest rates environment, as well as commercial property valuations have come down, in some cases 50-60% off their highs of 4 or 5 years ago. So it's one of these situations we're living in right now where it's perhaps a once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime opportunity for people to do this, and they just have to have a little courage and shake off the negative media headlines, and that's why I think we were so busy last year, because we had plenty of contrarian small business owners who were jumping on this.
Awesome. I want to turn the clocks back a little bit, Chris. I want you to tell me a little bit about where this entrepreneurship interest actually came from. I remember in the pre-interview, we actually talked a little bit about when you were growing up, and you told me that your mother was an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I talk about it in the book a little bit, in that I think it's easier for people to catch the entrepreneurial bug if they have somebody close to them, a mentor, or a parent, or what have you, who is one. And I'm no exception. I grew up outside of Peoria, Illinois, downstate Illinois, in a town of about 5,000, which would, if it weren't so close to Peoria, basically a suburb of Peoria, which is where Caterpillar, the big earth-moving company, is located, it would probably be a county seat. When I was a kid, we had one stoplight. We now have a couple stoplights there. We knew we arrived when we got the second McDonald's, which I don't know how McDonald's puts two in a town of 5,000, but that's on their end. So I, like a lot of Midwestern kids, I guess, my first business was my first entrepreneurial venture was a lawn care business, lawn maintenance business, which means in the spring and summer you're cutting grass, in the fall you're raking weeds, and in the winter you're doing back-breaking snow removal.
How old were you when you started this?
How old was I? I was 8 years old when I started that.
Wow.
Which is
impressive.
a year older than my son right now, who has never cut a blade of grass in his life. I don't think he's ever raked any leaves, and since we live in Florida, he hasn't had the privilege of shoveling snow, which is interesting. Maybe we can talk about that later, Matt, but that's been an interesting, I won't call it a bone of contention between my wife and I, but it's been an interesting discussion point about, how we're perhaps sheltering or spoiling our children these days versus how I grew up. I'm not suggesting they need to have quite the aggressively independent childhood I had, but I think we got to give them a little more hard work than what they're getting, perhaps. But anyway, so speaking ahead, I mean, my mother was a well-known chocolatier, believe it or not, which was kind of interesting. That's probably where I learned some of my early lessons in sales and marketing. I was helping my mother and helping her to sell the product, and she made it in our house, and she's still somewhat well known for that today. People, especially around the holidays, always ask for pounds and pounds of the chocolates she used to make. She also became a residential realtor when I was about 13, and I talk about that in the book, how I think that sort of set in motion this idea about real estate in my head, because I actually helped her study and pass the realtor's exam back in the day. And so that was kind of interesting. And, I had a lot of other, I've pretty much been working straight since I was 8 years old. I mean, I jumped about McDonald's a second ago. I mean, that was the only place I could get a job, like a quote-unquote legitimate job when I was 14 that would hire me. And so I worked at McDonald's, and that was an interesting experience, a kind of a pride-swelling experience, because I knew a lot of my friends at high school that did not work, and it was always a little humbling when they'd come to the drive-thru or something and I'd be working. But having said that, looking back now, I mean, I learned a tremendous amount at McDonald's, especially about operations and systems. And, it wasn't very long before I could do everything at McDonald's. I could do the cash register up front. I could handle drive-through. I could cook. I mean, the whole thing was pretty interesting. And so,
when you were actually
I just had a lot of stuff. I mean, I had a t-shirt business when I was in college. I mean, I had all sorts of other jobs. I mean, it's kind of funny. Shortly after I graduated from high school, I caught mono, I guess, and I think mostly it's because I just had no immune system left. I was just shocked from just working my butt off for so many years, but I just sort of had to, that was like the first summer I ever really sort of took off before I went to college, and then started all up again. So,
Chris, about your experience at McDonald's, that's really interesting. And what age range were you working there? Were you 15 or 16?
I worked there from 14 till I think I was 17 when I finally quit.
And when you were actually there, did you really internalize like what you were actually witnessing working in these different positions? Like, did you actually think, oh wow, this is a business system. Maybe I could apply this somewhere in the future? Or was it just kind of like an observation, and then later on you said, oh well, this has certainly contributed to my own business now, looking back? Hey, Chris, did I lose you there?
And I look back upon it. Over the years many times, and how to structure things, how to build a system, and how teachable that is to my employees to this day about trying to build something that's more of a routine. What I find is, I think the more routinized you make things in the business world, it actually sort of counterintuitively allows for more flexibility and more independence and actually perhaps even more creativity, because once you've established sort of the baseline and you know how it's supposed to operate and hopefully execute on that, there's going to be situations that pop up that are going to require more creativity. I mean, I kind of, in some ways, I liken it to like the special forces in the military. I mean, all those guys, they know how to take a beach, they know how to shoot, they know how to track somebody, all these different things, and those are all sort of a given. And then because they're so well trained in terms of the procedures and the systems, it actually, when they get into combat, and business is just another form of combat, maybe you're going to die, but if you're special forces, once you finally get into combat, and crazy things happen, because every plan is going to probably go awry at some point, I think it allows for them to be much more flexible and creative because they have such a solid, systematized background to fall back on if they need to. And I think that's how they've been so successful and been able to accomplish so much. And I think the same thing applies in really well-operated businesses. I mean, you alluded to before, I have a franchise I started about 4 years ago. I mean, that's one of the things that we try and do is with a franchise, you want things to be extremely systematized. And the more well-oiled that machine is, I think it allows for more creativity. I mean, again, I didn't expect this call to be about McDonald's, but think about McDonald's for a second. I mean, because they're so systematized, they've sort of been flexible enough that over the years they've come up with some of their best innovations from their franchisees. Things like the fish sandwich or the whole breakfast menu. I mean, all that came up because the franchisees were executing sort of as they should have at the baseline, and sort of freed their brains up to think about what else could they add or what else could they do extremely well. And fortunately, McDonald's higher-ups were open enough to that so that they were able to talk about some of these other things and to add some other product offerings. So I think the same thing applies to all businesses.
And is that how you're actually able to have the time or able to find the time to blog, make all these video blogs, to write a book, to start another company, Kennedy's? Is it because your business is very systematized and efficient?
My business is extremely systematized and efficient, yeah.
What's an example of that?
Yeah, I live and breathe what I'm talking to you about, absolutely.
What's an example of that, Chris?
An example of that. Well, let's take marketing here at Mercantile, for instance. So I'm the guy that comes up with the ideas about what to blog about, what to do a video blog about, but I'm not the guy who's, I may be the talent, so-called, to be the guy on camera, but I'm not going to be the guy that's going to edit the video. We have a process for that. I'm not going to be the guy that's going to upload the video across multiple platforms, who's going to syndicate the blog over multiple places where we syndicate the blog. I'm not going to be the guy who writes the copy for the email that goes out to our internal database about the fact that we have a new blog, although I will won't be the guy that edits that. I'm not the guy who's going to repurpose it across all of our social media platforms. Again, we have a process for that. So, I mean, these are things that we've adapted over time, and that, you know, we might, that very process of putting up a video blog might involve 4 of my staff members who are all doing different pieces of this and know exactly how many steps are in each piece and what they're supposed to do and how quickly they're supposed to do it. So, I mean, that's an example of it.
That's really interesting. I mean, I would encourage anyone listening to this to go to check out your company's blog and actually see specifically what you're speaking about, because to me, having seen a few of the videos, you make it look easy. It looks like you're just kind of hanging out in your office, you're talking about a specific subject in each video. But it makes sense though, because it is very professionally done when you think about it, and the way it's distributed, I can completely see how that's why it's successful. That's why it actually looks easy almost, because it's well done.
Well, I appreciate that, Matt. I mean, I will tell you that there's since we're talking about the video, I mean, it is easy to some extent. I mean, I'm very comfortable on camera. It takes a while, I think, for most people to get to that point, including myself. And, the staff calls me the one-take wonder. I mean, that happens a lot, where we just do one take and we're done. And if you get to that point, I mean, that helps a lot. You know, if you have to do 7 or 8 or 15 takes on the same video blog, it can eat up a lot of time and a lot of resources, and it's not as effective. So, yeah, I try to have a conversation with the camera. Hopefully it comes across that way. Now, I do have too many because I'm thinking there on the spot of what I'm trying to cover, but what you don't see is I've got sort of some notes usually across the way, just some bullet points that I want to try and cover, and that's it. I try not to, I mean, I've tried the teleprompter thing where, it's a rolling text, and I don't like that. I don't think it comes off very natural. I don't try to memorize things necessarily. I just try to have a conversation with somebody, just like what we're having now, and hopefully that comes across very genuine and transparent with the viewers. And we've had a lot of viewers. I mean, I think we're well over 300,000 views, and here we are, we're a finance company that finances commercial property. So I think that's not too bad.
Definitely not. So, you're growing up, you start working when you're 8, you're shoveling snow, you move on as a teenager, you're working at McDonald's, you go to college,
right.
You go to GE, and after GE, you start Mercantile Capital. Now, when you're first starting out, are you working from home? Are you working from your basement? Yeah. What did it look like, and how did it feel, and what were some of the things that you were doing to market the company and grow it on a daily basis?
Well, from the commonality from almost from day one with me is I've always done multiple things at the same time. So I've always had lots of balls in the air I'm juggling. So, while I was working all the time in high school, for instance, I was a soccer player, I was a swimmer, I played basketball and baseball my freshman year. I mean, I did a lot of things. I was very active in other extracurricular activities, and so it's very comfortable for me to have my plate full, so to speak. And so when I left GE, to make a long story short, a few years later I became a management consultant and really enjoyed that. And one of the ways I finally stopped being a management consultant is, I had this idea for Mercantile, and my business partner, who he's been with me now for over 10 years, he and I had known each other. I had invested in some commercial real estate developments over the years, and I had known him in that way. He's an ex-banker, and he wanted me to come in and become the CFO at a very large, second largest in Orlando commercial real estate firm. And I did that, and at the same time I started that is when we basically we began Mercantile. And so I sort of straddled the fence between the two companies for about 18 months. The office I was in was about 250 square feet, something like that. It's now since become a copy room in the old office, and we just launched. I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it than this, but I think at the beginning, to answer your question, I mean, I was sort of doing everything, and so I've had that experience of really starting a company from scratch and being in every box of the organizational chart. and having to do everything until you have the budget or the resources to start delegating some of those things that perhaps you're not as good at. I mean, I'm a big believer in focusing on, what you're good at, your strengths, and trying to delegate your weaknesses. And so that's worked really well for us. But it's it was a struggle. I mean, the first month we had, I should say that the first big month we had. It just so happened that we had 4 loans closed that month. Which, if you're starting from scratch, if you're marketing to get the loans in, to put the commercial loans in, if you're underwriting the loans, if you're then closing the loans, all these things you can't really wear a different hat while you're focused on that one particular task. And so I was doing all these. Now we have multiple people doing all these different tasks here. I mean, we've got 25 employees and about half a dozen part-time employees as well. So, but back then, it just so happened that all these things were happening at the same time. My wife actually gave birth to my son.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you were actually married during this time.
Stressful month for me. Yeah, it was ridiculously stressful for me. But I can appreciate the growing pains that most entrepreneurs have worked through, and I will tell you, it gets better over time. I was naive enough to think back when I started that I'd be able to set my own hours, and I wouldn't be working as hard as I used to, and all these other things that entrepreneurs tell themselves and their spouses and those that they're close with until they start to get into this, and then they realize that that's just not the case. You actually probably work harder, but it's hopefully you're more passionate about the work that you're doing, and it's more gratifying to you personally.
Is that the case now?
Absolutely. Well, it's the case that it's gratifying, and it means more to me personally. It's not the case that I'm killing myself.
That's good. Did that actually push you though when your son was born? Did you say, "Oh my God, I have a family now. Like I have to succeed. I'm going to quit this job. I'm going to make Mercantile successful, and I have to do it." Was that on your mind?
Yeah, it was. I mean, he's my second. I actually have a daughter who's 11 and the son is 9.
Okay.
And, I think it definitely went through my head. But I sometimes have and I felt like this was the case with Mercantile. I have a little bit of that, burn the bridges behind you type of mentality. The old Viking idea of, if they were going to go invade some new land, they would burn the bridges behind them, burn the boats behind them, I should say. So that they can't retreat, so that there is no option but to succeed. There's no option for failure. Because I'm not a big believer in failure. I just think that everything that you do is teaching you something that you can hopefully tweak and adjust from, and come back at it a different way. And so that's how I've always lived my life. Obviously I've made many so-called failures that some people would think are failures, but I think that's how I've gotten to some of the other places that I have. So yeah, I mean it's. I use whatever motivation I can. In that case, I got a young family, and my wife just gave birth to a newborn, and this thing better succeed. Absolutely, I use whatever I can, no question.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
In the pre-interview, we spoke a little bit about failure and about haters. Is there a story there about perhaps someone in your network who doubted you, or perhaps who was your rival, and they just kind of were a negative or even driving force in kind of pushing you forward? Is there a story there? Well,
sure. Yeah, I talk a little bit about this in my book as well, which is that, when I had this idea to create Mercantile, that I was, we're effectively a bank. I mean, we actually are now a bank. But at the time we started, bankers, like a lot of industry, like a lot of folks in different industries, have this notion of what I'll call vertical integration, which is you want to offer a tremendous amount of products and services to your clients so that they have, they can get everything they need just from you, okay? As opposed to specializing in maybe one or two things. Perhaps you offer 20, 30, 40, 50 different products and services. And what it tends to do is it makes you more of a generalist. Well, in the banking world, so different. I mean, if you go to a bank now, especially a bigger bank, you need lines of credit, great. You want loans, no problem. You want to get purchase order financing, perhaps. Now they do payroll, they do insurance, they do retirement plans. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. It's never ending. Well, I would contend that, as we learned early on in life, that you can be a jack of all trades and a master of none. And I think that we live in much more of a specialist economy these days than perhaps we ever have. And so going into this 10 plus years ago, I knew that I wanted to have a lending firm, a bank, that would predominantly deal with one commercial loan product, which is underserved. I mean, it's a classic entrepreneurial look at things, which is there's an opportunity and I can fulfill the opportunity, take advantage of it. This was a commercial loan product that was not well marketed. It was not well performed by a lot of lenders. And I felt like that could be our one product offering. And, I talked to some of my past friends who might have had an interest in joining with us to start this firm. And most all of them, the commonality that we all had was they would listen to what I'm proposing and sort of scratch their head and say, well, you're doomed to failure. Well, how can you be a lender with only one product? I mean, that's crazy. Nobody does that. Nobody's done that ever. And then I would say, oh, by the way, it happens to be this program that's through the government that, pays for itself, but nevertheless, it's partly administered through the government and, all these things. And that's usually when the guys would scratch their head and then walk away laughing, saying, this is never going to work. What is gratifying to this day is some of those folks are no longer in the commercial finance arena. Some of those folks have moved to multiple different lenders. Obviously, I think that's in part epitomizes their unhappiness, and some of them aren't even in the banking industry whatsoever. They've failed and have gone out. So, I never want to gloat on others' failures necessarily, but it certainly when I was starting out, it was that extra motivation that was pushing you to sort of prove them wrong. And I don't think some people think that's petty and you shouldn't do things like that. But again, my point is you use whatever motivation you can. You don't want to hate on other people, but if other people are showing that towards you, I think it can fuel you somewhat, and I think it can push you to achieve perhaps things that you didn't think were possible.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand that. So you started Mercantile, your family's growing, and how did you find the first clients?
The first clients? Well, I mean, fortunately, I've been in the industry for a little bit, so people knew who I was. But the biggest thing I've done, which again is very different than I think most people in my industry, I always thought that, again, it's just a personal philosophy. I think that there's a lot of broke, brilliant people out there. And what I mean by that is, and in fact, it's kind of funny because I was reading the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago. I was on a plane, and there was some study that somebody's come out with, and like the number of people with master's degrees and PhDs on welfare has skyrocketed to an all-time high. And it kind of makes my point, which is you can be brilliant at something and not know how to tell the world about it, and it won't matter how brilliant you are. And obviously, the way you bridge that gap is I believe, partly is through marketing. And I don't think enough emphasis is put on marketing of your product and services by most entrepreneurs, no matter what industry they're in. Mine is no different. In the banking world, I mean, generally, the theory is that you're either a finance guy or you're a marketing guy, but there's hardly anybody that's both. That's using both sides of your brain at once. I mean, who does that, right? But that was my contention at the beginning, that if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to start in an industry where I'm clearly a David versus a bunch of Goliaths that have hundreds of thousands of employees and billions, if not trillions of dollars in assets and branches all over and all these types of things, how am I possibly going to bridge that gap? And my solution was I'm going to market. I'm going to focus on one thing. I'm going to try and be the best in the world at it. Where they're all focused on being generalists, I'm going to be a specialist and become the expert at it, number one. And number two, I'm going to make sure everybody knows it. And the way to do that, of course, is to market and to get our message out there, which hardly anybody was doing at the time. And still to this day, very few bankers know how to market properly. I mean, one of the regular speech topics I give around the country at conferences is about how to market, and because I don't think a lot of people do it correctly. And even in a sort of a staid, conservative industry like banking, they certainly don't do it correctly. And so if you do that, if you go against the conventions in an industry, it's an easy way to stand out. And, if your focus is on helping your clients solve a problem, as opposed to just, branding yourself and pushing out, look at our new sexy logo or whatever the case is, I think that resonates. And I think that's a way that you can get customers. And so we did that right away. I mean, we had a website early on. It was, those are back in the days, it was more brochureware, but I tried to make it much more direct response. I tried to give away free reports that I wrote, which nobody had done before. And, it's kind of come full circle now here where we're at, and I've got an Amazon bestseller book about some of these things, because it's just one more tool in my toolkit to use to try and not only educate the marketplace, but also promote my business and what we do. So I've done so many different marketing things over the years. It's one of the things we do now. We're all over social media. We use multiple different channels of social media. We try to repurpose a lot of the content that we produce, and people syndicate our content, and we try to get things out there that's useful and helpful. And you still don't see too many people in my industry that know how to use these things very well, and are committed to it, and really understand that it's about engagement and having conversations with people and trying to meet their needs and solve their problems. So we do a lot of that. It's, I could probably spend talking about all the different things we've done in the past from a marketing standpoint to get us to stand out and be differentiated from everybody else we compete with.
Yeah, the reports idea is an interesting one. I mean, how do you actually develop concepts for what to create a report around? Do you do research on the internet, or do you actually go out and survey people? How do you create the report?
No, I didn't survey people. I may have done a little bit of research, but I think it's just a function of me being in the industry and just knowing the questions that I was asked regularly. And so I developed, my first one, which we even got it copyrighted. It's kind of funny. I got a Library of Congress copyright thing around here somewhere. I don't know where it's at these days, but it was sort of like the 12 reasons why, that we were best for your small business or something to that effect, the title of it. And, we just simple white paper type of a thing. And it worked really well because it got people, now it's common knowledge. It's been common.
Chris, you wrote a report about... I don't mean to cut you off, Chris, but your first report was actually also a marketing vehicle where it says 12 reasons why Mercantile Capital is the best for your business? Yeah,
that's what it was.
Wow.
Yeah, and I answered all the questions. And as I was saying, 10 years ago, that was kind of new that somebody would come onto our website and type in their name and their email, and maybe it gave us their telephone and I don't know what else, and then we would send them this free report. I mean, that was pretty new. Nowadays, obviously, that's very common. Everybody tries to capture contact information because I always thought that was really important. I just think how can I build up an internal database that I can communicate regularly unless I give something away? And here it is. I'm just giving away something educational. So
that's particularly interesting because the content in the report is where does the value come from for the person? Because it sounds like from the title that they're actually just kind of opting into being sold by your company. Is that right?
Well, no, it wasn't. The title wasn't. I'm butchering the title. I think it was something like 12 reasons why a 504 loan is best for your business. And the particular product that we specialize in is called the 504 loan. We've rebranded it the Smart Choice Commercial Loan. And I went through and explained how it compares to ordinary conventional financing. And so we talked about down payment and loan terms and pricing and covenants and all these other things that probably nobody on this call cares about. But all these different things that we discussed to separate us from everybody else that we compete against. And many of those questions or things that I was addressing relate to common misperceptions and myths that had perpetuated in the small business lending community up to that point. And we would continue to do that to this day. We continue to put stuff out to try and overcome myths and misperceptions because there's a lot of them out there. And it's probably the same with a lot of people's industries. To me, that's an easy thing to do if you're trying to search for content and what you need to work on. Take on the 3 or 10 different things that everybody screws up in the industry or all the everybody gossips about or there's the myth that persists in your industry and try to turn those on their heads.
That's really practical advice, and I think everyone listening to this should just make a note of that as potentially a marketing campaign that they could actually do if they're looking for ideas. Because a lot of the complaints that I hear from other entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs is that they can't come up with good ideas for blog posts or reports or content to put out there. So I think it's a really great suggestion what you just gave. In the pre-interview, we spoke to a little bit about one interesting story. It's a little funny. You actually got in trouble for this. In one of your, I think, direct marketing campaigns, you sent out medicine bottles. You want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I've always done a lot of interesting things. Again, with marketing, I mean, it's back to my point about a lot of broke geniuses. I mean, look, hopefully if you hone your marketing message correctly, it really doesn't mean anything unless you can get it out there. And so, one of the ways I think that people can cut through the clutter, which is that cliche that everybody seems to know these days, but, back 8 years ago, let's say, not too many people had heard that. And I've sort of, things have gone in waves in my business. And so, like, for instance, we don't do as much direct mail as we used to, but we used to do a ton of direct mail. There's only so many envelopes and postcards that you can send out. I mean, again, we could spend hours talking about all this now, but eventually I started to do what I call dimensional mail. And so what I mean by that is things that just by their very look and appearance stand out versus everything else in the mailbox. And so one of the things we did very successfully, actually, was I was able to, I had the idea, the prescription pill bottles, they're orange with like at least historically, they're usually orange with like a white cap on them. Well, I'd read somewhere that the post office has to accept all these different shapes and sizes of all these things and you can mail it. And I thought, well, gee, why don't we take that and why don't we mail it like that? And we'll fold up a letter and put it inside the pill box and we'll tape it down. And oh, by the way, you probably should put something in there so it sort of jiggles and makes noise because let's just not take any chances here. Let's assume that maybe they would throw it out, but then they hear something jiggling around in there and now they're interested in even more peaks. And so we put a couple BBs in there. And, we related it back to something about being
I'm sorry, you put a couple of what?
A mortgage doctor or something like that. What's that?
You put a couple of beads in the bottles, you said?
BBs, BBs.
Oh, BBs, okay. Got it, BBs.
Yeah. So, and we related it all back, and the message is about, curing what ails their net worth, and, this mostly went out to referral partners to us. It didn't go necessarily out to the end users because the universe of small business end users is massive. And so we mostly sent out to referral partners, and we were talking about curing their clients' net worth, what ails them, and how we were sort of the MDs of the industry, the mortgage doctors, all this type of stuff. All this language was about sort of how we diagnose problems and solve them, and all these different things, right? And so it was very successful, and what you're alluding to is, we got called by a couple different cops on it. I think somebody out in Salt Lake City, and I can't remember where the other place was, but they weren't sure if it was a bomb or why it rattled around and all these types of things. And, that's happened a couple times from some of the stuff that we've sent, which is kind of interesting because people get a little hysterical about things sometimes. Anything that is not the norm. But the problem is the norm doesn't always work. I could have just sent out regular envelopes for years and years and years and settled for some mediocre response rate, and we didn't want to do that. We constantly push the envelope, so to speak, to use the cliche, and we do different things. When we send out postcards, if we do it, part of the reason we use postcards occasionally is because you don't have to. Believe it or not, the barrier of opening an envelope sometimes is enough to cause some of your target audience not to bother. So we would send out postcards, and we would have oversized postcards, and we started using variable data long before anybody else was using it. So in other words, we're putting the people's name throughout the text copy of the postcard and addressing it to them because that tends to boost response rates as well. And so all these different things we've tried over the years. Yeah, it's been fun actually. Some of those things are some of the more fun things to do in business is to try and constantly push the boundaries of what you can get away with, what you can try.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a really interesting observation about a postcard versus an envelope because you're right, it does add an extra step. I don't think most of us would necessarily tune into that, but it's definitely true. So in terms of how the marketing has changed since the business has really grown in the last 3 years, are you doing any types of interesting tactics like that when it comes to online marketing? I mean, the equivalent of sending out a medicine bottle that maybe we can learn from?
Well, I mean, one thing I've had a blog since 2006, and so it's only been in the last 2 to 3 years that the blog has moved over mostly from text to video. And I did that because I think, again, I don't think we live in a culture that doesn't read as much as it once did. I mean, most people would rather just click a button and watch a video. And so because of that, because things are changing, we've sort of adapted and moved in that direction. We still do pay-per-click advertising on all the search engines. We've done that for many, many years. We've learned a lot from it. We actually pay attention to the analytics and what works and what doesn't. And so our spends are not nearly what they were many years ago. I mean, I know several years that we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on pay-per-clicks, and now we're a fraction of that. But we're maintaining that online sales channel in terms of interest from that and quality leads, and obviously turning people into customers from that. I mean, we focused a lot over the years on content, producing a lot of good, valuable content, and pushing that out. Long before that was sort of a strategy to do. And we didn't do a lot of the black hat stuff has come and gone, and Google's slapped people left and right on a variety of things. Fortunately, we never did any of that. We thought that was a little bit unethical, and we didn't try to game the system too much. We thought that was probably going to come back and bite us if we ever tried it. And fortunately, we were correct in that assumption. And so I don't know. I mean, we were kind of early to the bandwagon on a lot of social media things because I feel like we're always looking for the next thing, and so we've got thousands of fans and followers and subscribers and connectors and all whatever else you can come up with. And so we've been working on that. I don't know. I mean, we're just we're constantly looking for new things, and I guess the answer to your question, Matt, is unfortunately for some people that are looking for a silver bullet or that one magical thing that's going to fix everything, it really doesn't exist. I mean, I hate to tell you, but I think you got to do it all. I think you got to try everything, and if you want to be successful and rise above the average in your industry, then you're going to have to cover all your bases. You're going to have to try a lot of different things, and you won't know necessarily instantly what's working or what's not working. And so you got to try it, and my guess is it's going to get fairly complicated, and you're going to have multiple channels that you're working on, and keeping a lot of people busy, and that's okay, and that's how you become successful. I mean, let the other people choose to settle in your industry for what everybody else does. My view is if everybody else is doing something in your industry, chances are they're probably wrong, and you probably need to do something 180 degrees opposite of what they're doing. Because, if you do what everybody else does, there's that regression to the mean, to the average. And, I don't want to be average. I don't want to be mediocre. I think I have an obligation to myself and my family, my employees, and, if I want to get spiritual to other things, to give it my all and to try and be as excellent as I can be. And so I don't want to just do the minimum to get by. I'm always trying to do the next thing. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
no, it is, Chris. And my next question is, you talk a lot in this interview. You're talking a lot about like ideas and about philosophy. Does that actually come through in your marketing too? Like, do you actually talk about or kind of somehow convey what you and your company and your team believes through your marketing? Is that a big part of what you actually do?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely do it. I mean, we've written so much copy over the years, I think it would be impossible for us not to cover some of these things. So I certainly do it in the video blogs that I do. I mean, we've kind of joked around you for a while about how we sort of have this unwritten manifesto, which I think is very helpful. I mean, I think one of these days, if we slow down enough, maybe we'll write it down and we'll figure it out. But I mean, yeah, pieces of our sort of what would otherwise be on our manifesto always sort of creeps out in the things that we do. Certainly, there's a lot of it in the book that I read. The things come out in our video blogs, things come out in our written blogs. They certainly come out in our postings on social media. The videos that we like or the quotes that we put up, and of course, just again another thing we do. I mean, we don't just put up like a text only quote, multiple times a day. We actually have it as a graphic, as an image, because that's obviously read, and the algorithms on a lot of the social media channels, you're more likely to be seen if it's more of an image or a graphic as opposed to just a text only. And so we have all that, and it's got our contact information on it, and all these different types of things, and we try to think all these things through. So, but your question about, does our philosophy come out? I think, yeah, absolutely it does. Everybody knows here what we're trying to accomplish. I think everybody that works for us, if they've lasted any period of time, which most of our employees have, most of our employees have been here 7, 8, 9, 6, 5 years, something like that. I mean, a lot of, again, I have a philosophy about trying to hire people younger and train them my way, because so many people in my industry, the financial service industry, hire people who've been around for a while, and then, of course, they've got their baggage from somewhere else, and you have to almost untrain them, and retrain them again. And so hiring people that really just didn't know what they didn't know has worked extremely well for me. I mean, I've had 6, 7 dozen interns over the years work for me. Probably hired 13 or 14 of my full-time staff from our internship pool. So, yeah, a lot of these things come through. Absolutely, they come through in a lot of the things that we do and how we conduct ourselves. And yeah, no question.
I have 2 more questions. Let's move over to Kennedy's for a moment. Going from Mercantile Capital, which is commercial loans to small business owners and entrepreneurs, to Kennedy's All-American Barber Club, how do you make that leap? And what's been one of the biggest takeaways that you've gotten from the experience thus far?
Well, I figure, if Steve Jobs could have multiple companies, why not me? I mean, no, it really is. There's a little bit of an evolution there as well, which is that I've financed so many different franchise concepts over the years through Mercantile that I've come to appreciate and understand the franchise business model, the idea of having you being the franchisor and owning the intellectual property and having hopefully a turnkey business system that you sell to someone else to operate in a geographic area. That's fundamentally what a franchise is. And so, I've financed so many different food concepts and hospitality concepts and other weird things over the years, tile franchises, and I don't know what else, Cito franchise one time, all sorts of things. That I thought that was sort of my next evolution in my business career, was to become a franchisor, but I was very picky about what I wanted. And so what I came across about 4 years ago was, in my own backyard, was a barbershop. And that doesn't sound very sexy on the surface, I get that. But what's unique about this is it started about 6 years ago, and they have 4 locations, and it was a couple of British guys who started it, and they applied, again, looking back to what I said earlier, taking something from another industry and applying it to their industry. So what they did was they had a membership concept as part of a men's grooming business. And I really liked that. I thought that was great. Not only that, but there's a lot of things about the barbershop industry that appealed to me. It's a very fragmented industry. It's very much a mom-and-pop industry. It was a dying industry. It has had some resurgence over the last couple of years, but in general, it's nowhere near what it once was in our culture, which was it was a pillar of every community. I mean, this is a place where fathers took their sons and tried to share gentleman values with their sons. It's where guys would talk about politics and sports and actually cared about how they were groomed and things like that. And so I think a lot of that has been lost. And so I want to try and bring some of that back and obviously modernize it for today. And so I actually became a member at first. And about 9 months later, my partner was complaining one day when I was going in for my every couple week haircut, straight razor shave, which I'd never had a straight razor shave before I owned Kennedy's, or before I bought this concept, I should say. And my antenna went off when they started talking about how they weren't having much support from corporate. And by the end of my shave, I said, well, who do I need to talk to see if they can hold this up to me? And so that started about a 9-month process, and before you know it, we bought the concept, changed the name because the name didn't really have much value to it, and I wanted to make it much more appealing and interesting, but yet at the same time nebulous, meaning different things to different people. I upgraded all the memberships, added memberships. Now we have Life, Liberty, Pursuit of Happiness. Those are our copyright or trademarked membership names, and Amazing Gentlemen. And really, it sort of fit into my overall vision of not just to have a business or run a business, but actually try and be part of a movement. And that's something we haven't talked about before, Matt. But I view Mercantile as sort of a movement business in that I am trying to show and provide small business owners in America how to create additional wealth, because I think that's something that, while we know that from statistics, that from surveys, 60% or so of small business owners in America haven't saved a dime for their retirement. Well, if I can teach them the simple strategy of how to own the property in which their business, the facility in which their business operates out of, and it creates wealth to them over time, much like why they moved out of an apartment into a home, then I think that's a tremendous value, and that's a bit of a movement. It's, in the book I talk about at the end, we know back in the early 80s, Bill Gates had this vision of putting a PC on every desktop in every home. And my view has always been, for every healthy small business, I want them on their property, because I think it makes a lot of sense from a net worth standpoint. Well, in the instance of Kennedy's, my view is I'm trying to bring back sort of those lost gentlemanly values, and guys actually care about how their appearance is, but also give them a place where they can discuss these things and sort of appreciate the small indulgences in life, and so that's what we're trying to do with Kennedy's. Our timing was terrible, however, in that we started literally a month before the financial world almost ended, back in August 2008. But we're up to 13 locations now. We're right at about 3,000 members, and not all of our customers are members. I mean, we've also got about a couple thousand regulars who are just not members. Maybe they don't have much hair, and they don't get their hair cut every 10 days to 2 weeks, like most of our customers, or most of our members, I should say. So yeah, it's kind of fun, and it's very different than the banking world, but yet at the same time, we do a lot of sales choreography, and we have a lot of specific procedures in place of how to deliver the Kennedy's experience, which makes us very different and makes us stand out from most of the other haircutting places that we would otherwise compete with.
Chris, I want to thank you for coming on today and doing this interview. I'm going to do a quick plug for Saber Blast, and then we're going to wrap up and review some of the points that you gave and some of the pieces of advice that I want people to walk away with from this. So this interview, as I mentioned at the top, is sponsored by Saber Blast. What if we marketed our businesses together instead of going it alone? Saber Blast is a tool that helps you attract new customers by formally teaming up with other businesses to cross-promote each other's products, services, blog posts, newsletters, and more. Go viral instantly and stop begging for retweets and social media shares. You can check it out at saberblast.com. In addition, if you want to learn more about Chris's company, Mercantile Corp, you can visit them at 504experts.com. And if you want to pick up a copy of Chris's book, go to Amazon, and the name is The Entrepreneur's Secret to Creating Wealth. And before we say goodbye, I wrote down a few notes here that I think are really key takeaways from this interview. And Chris, feel free to add to this. Start a movement and have a philosophy. Implement systems to make things more efficient and keep building on them. Create valuable content, put out there for free, and use that as a vehicle to actually drive sales and leads and build positive reputation around your brand. Be unique. you'll recall I think the medicine bottle example will always stay with me, and hopefully with other entrepreneurs. You want to take risks. Obviously, don't name your company, but take risks. And I think the expression is ready, fire, aim. And cut through the clutter when you're actually refining your messaging, because you don't want to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. You want to portray that you're solving a specific problem. And finally, failure is a myth. Ignore the haters. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
I think you covered a lot of stuff. I mean, we could spend hours more talking about this, but I think that's a great start. Appreciate you having me on there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris. And again, the website is 504experts.com, and the book is The Entrepreneur's Secret to Creating Wealth. Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right. Take care, man.
Take care.